The silence inside the Ottoman harem had a weight unlike any other, a quiet so thick it pressed against your skin, settling in your bones before the first wan light of dawn even crept through the latticed windows. You woke in a room where the air hung heavy with faint traces of almond oil and a whisper of cheap perfume, an invisible fog clinging stubbornly to every corner. The rugs under your feet were soft, threadbare from endless footsteps, but no amount of softness could dull the monotony wrapping around you like a shroud. Imagine a world where a dead phone battery would be the least of your worries. Here, trapped behind carved wooden screens, the fading sunlight was a precious but rare visitor. Most days, you never saw it outright. Instead, fractured patterns danced lazily on the cool walls, where shadows braided with the thick scent of jasmine and musk. A distant lute hummed from somewhere deep in the palace, subtly threading through the quiet. It was a sound both haunting and oddly soothing, like a lullaby that never quite ended. Your hands, like old friends, passed the time twisting prayer beads, a repetitive, soothing motion, while your eyes barely blinked over the withering petals in the small garden that was both your sanctuary and your cage. The green leaves, once lush, now curled and browned, crumbling under your touch. You plucked them again and again, sighing softly, your breath mingling with the faint rustle of silk dresses moving quietly beyond your sight. This daily dance of care was simple yet endless. The flowers demanded attention, but the world outside continued, untouchable, untamed. The bustling shout of the palace, the clatter of horses' hooves, the sharp call of merchants, all faded into distant echoes, unable to breach these walls, just like your freedom. Earlier, a brother whispered news of a new sultan's decree, the kind of crippling news that felt like a sudden chill on a winter morning. In that instant, the usual murmur of the harem fell away. The dogs stopped barking, the servants ceased their chatter, for a heartbeat suspended in uneasy silence. Eyes flitted briefly between each other, unspoken thoughts passing in a glance. The scent of almonds and worn wood suddenly seemed heavier, laden with unvoiced fears. Yet a flicker of defiant hope stirred when, as if responding to some invisible signal, a stray cat slinked through the courtyard, its green eyes sparkling despite the dimness. It prowled on, indifferent to the weight of the palace's secrets and the slow passage of time. Before your eyes closed slowly under the growing heaviness, sewing needle poised between finger and thumb, you knew tomorrow would bring the same rhythm, a cycle as unyielding as the stars hidden beyond the lattice. Hey, before Morpheus fully claims you, check quickly if you're still subscribed. For some, the button mysteriously vanished, and I wouldn't want you to miss the next sleepy tales. Go ahead, drop a like as soft as a pillow. Tell me in the comments, where are you listening from, and what time is it? There, Your little keepsake of interaction keeps this calm corner alive. Thanks for being part of it. The stray cat's silhouette disappeared into the deeper shadows of the courtyard, leaving a lingering trace of emerald in the fading gloom. You exhaled slowly, tracing the curl of the sewing needle between your fingers one last time before setting it aside. The faint thread of warmth left in the room slipped away, replaced by the chill of the coming day. Outside, somewhere beyond the lattice, the palace was waking, like a beast rousing from its cage. Streams of voices rising, the scrape of wooden wheels, and the endless clatter of footsteps on stone. Your world remains sealed, apart, yet sharply aware. The new decree, a shroud over whispers, hovered in the air. Like smoke, you couldn't fully see, but knew would choke the thin hope lingering in the marrow of your bones. The harem, usually alive with the soft rustle of silk and quiet laughter, sat subdued as though holding its breath, waiting for the invisible tide to crest. You stood and moved slowly to the small mirror fixed beside the window. In its dim reflection, your eyes did not lie. There was a hardness there, an edge sharpened by months. By years trapped within these walls, dressed in velvet and secrets. The skin was smooth, yes, but beneath a storm churned, a yearning impossible to disguise. Outside, the sounds swelled, the clanging of the guard's armor, the distant shout of a merchant hawking his wares. But none of it pierced. These interwoven screens, or the thick perfumed air steeped in jasmine and musk. You turned back to the garden, the faint life stubbornly clutching to brittle leaves seemed to mock your own condition. Its survival, tentative and uncertain, mirrored yours. The servants drifted through like ghosts, their eyes flickering with shared unease. A few dared exchange hushed snippets near the fountains, fragments of rumors, bitter as the lemon they used to mask the palace's less pleasant odors. You caught a whisper about the Sultan's eyes being sharper now, more calculating, as if the very stones around you had ears and could report disobedience before it even blossomed in thought. You let your gaze wander over the intricate lattice work. Patterns of light became a delicate dance. The same shadows you had watched fade and bloom since your first sunrise here. It was a prison's poetry, trapping the sun's warmth in angular bars. You pressed a palm lightly against the wooden frame, feeling a chill seep through, as if the lattice was sucking the life from your hand. Your thoughts flitted unwillingly to your brother's words earlier, a warning winged with dread, but coated in strange hope. The Sultan's decree was harsh, restrictions tightening, freedoms further carved away. Yet beneath the heavy blanket of fear, a single ember flickered. Somehow, through barriers and silence, small cracks began to form. For a fleeting moment, the scent of almonds and worn wood transformed. It wasn't just the fragrance of confinement. It carried subtle undertones of resilience, like the cat that walked unbothered, paws soft on cold stone. Spirits were quietly shifting. In that hush, You wondered what plans whispered behind closed doors, not just for obedience, but rebellion. The slow approach of footsteps stilled your breath. A young servant girl appeared, her eyes darting as she held a folded scroll, a fragile vessel of news. She handed it to you with trembling hands, before retreating like a shadow swallowed by velvet curtains. The parchment felt unreal in your grasp, as if it carried the weight of both doom and deliverance. Breaking the seal, you unfolded the paper with careful reverence. The calligraphy was elegant, but merciless, bearing terms that made your heart tighten. Yet amid the glaring sentences imposing curfews and punishment, a smaller line caught your eye. A secret invitation, discreet and veiled in official language. A summons to an audience, an opportunity cloaked in risk. Your pulse thrummed loud enough to drown the distant lute. It was impossible to say if this was a trap or a lifeline, but it was most certainly a challenge. To stand, to speak, to bide your chance, or to remain a ghost in silk and shadow. The afternoon light shifted, bleeding through the lattice, dimming in slow, purposeful retreat. The garden's fragile leaves seemed to lean closer, as if listening. The quiet murmurs of the palace resumed, weaving a tapestry of sound that set your skin prickling with anticipation. You slid the scroll into your sleeve, securing the clandestine thread that might unravel or mend your fate. Each breath you drew was heavier, tinged with the dust of history and the possibility of change. As the sun dipped lower, you found yourself at the threshold of your small chamber. The weight of the unknown pressing against the frame. The soft murmur of distant laughter, the faint curl of smoke from the kitchens, and the restless stirring of the palace clock marked the slow passage of this delicate moment. In that charged silence, your eyes drifted once more to the hidden stars, obscured yet persistently there, just like the hope nestled deep inside you. And when the lattice finally swallowed the last sliver of daylight, you understood the night carried its own kind of reckoning. Tomorrow, you would step further into the shadows, where secrets waited beneath the silken veil, waiting to pull you deeper into the labyrinth. But the echo that made your blood freeze came not from the palace, but from beyond its walls. The sudden, sharp cry of a distant horn, an omen that shattered the fragile quiet, a summons you could neither ignore nor outrun. The horn's cry lingered, a ragged thread against the morning's slow unraveling chorus. It stitched a raw edge into the palace's fabric, a sudden alarm that seethed beneath the perfumed veil of jasmine and musk. You felt the vibration deep in your chest, a tremor that shook loose the fragile calm sown through the night. Outside, the courtyard was no longer just a still stage. The stray cat, that silent, emerald-eyed witness from yesterday's shadow play, had vanished, swallowed up. In the palace's shift from whispered dread to uneasy motion, the servants hurried past, their footsteps quick but careful. like they feared the stone beneath might carry secrets away to the Sultan's ears before they were meant to travel. You took a slow breath, tasting the cooling dust stirred from the dim corners, the scent sharp as crushed almonds and the faint bitterness of dried citrus. Each breath was a reminder you were still here, trapped within endless layers of silk and silence, but not invisible. The scroll, folded neatly in your sleeve, was hot against your skin, its weight more than mere parchment. It pulsed with possibility and threat alike, like a beating heart hidden beneath fragile paper. That secret invitation, so carefully veiled, held the promise of movement. In a world that had long since forgotten what freedom felt like, the soft rustle of silk alerted you to an approaching shadow, a servant's whisper, near enough to catch, barely more than a breath. The Sultan was watching differently now. Eyes sharp and calculating, scrutinizing the walls, as if the stone and lattice might betray whispers before they escaped lips. Your fingers brushed the lattice, pried by years of longing. The wood was cool and rough beneath your palm, grain fracturing, like the fragments of your hope. The lattice both barred you in and framed the light, a cage and a canvas for fractured sunbeams to play prison guard. You traced the patterns, mapping escape routes, invisible to those who didn't share your silence. A distant murmur rose, voices spilling like slow rivers, pulled through the veins of the palace. Horses stamped in the corral, hooves like pounding drums, marking an unseen march. Somewhere, the faint clatter of wheels echoed, a harsh counterpoint to the sweet strains of the lute, now a mere memory in the thickening air. You moved to the garden window, its brittle leaves, curling as if burned by wind and neglect, stirred faintly in the waking breeze. The tangled green was stubborn, clutching the last threads of life, much like you clung to fragments of hope. A lone petal drifted free and twirled in the air. You caught it mid-fall, cool and fragile in your palm, the perfect emblem of beauty caught in a moment before inevitable surrender. The world you lived in was stitched with paradox. The velvet luxury that cradled you was as much a prison as the thick shadows gathering beneath the heavy tapestries. Outside corridors hummed with secret movement. Tension curled just beneath polite smiles and downward glances. Your thoughts snapped back to the scroll. The message was clear, but unreadable. A dance of words fashioned to blind watchful eyes. A summons, but to what? A trap, no doubt, woven by those who ruled with sharpened tongues and colder hearts. Yet it was a chance, however perilous, to step beyond the muted silence. The room felt smaller now, the shadows lengthening, swallowing corners where faint rays of dying light once lingered. You folded your hands, feeling the steady pulse of your own restrained heartbeat echoing in the confined space sewing needle, prayer beads, familiar comfort in loops of habit that steadied nerves and filled time like a quiet ritual against the storm. Far beyond your small chamber, the palace vibrated with the noise of a world shifting. The cries of merchants, the clanking of armor, the shuffle of hurried footsteps, all streaming like restless currents, unable to pierce the carved wooden walls, but reminding you of life's pulse beyond iron bars. In the slow retreat of day, a sliver of cold air traced the lattice edges. You pressed your cheek against the rough wood, eyes closing as the scents mingled. Jasmine's sweetness, musk's earthiness, and a sharp undercurrent of something darker. Fear, yes, but also defiance. The cat's green eyes flashed once more in your mind, a silent guardian of secrets and shadows. It prowled through darkness untouchable, wild and free, an echo of something your heart knew, but your body denied. That wildness was alive, embodied in whispered hopes, tangled with dread. Your gaze drifted to the sky beyond the lattice as the first stars began to pierce the dusk, a sparse scattering of cold light over a world heavy with silence. They seemed distant, yet constant, shining through the thick fabric of your confinement. And beneath that star-splattered darkness, the scroll's summons pulsed faintly once again, a heartbeat compelling you forward into uncertainty. The path ahead wasn't clear, but there was movement, a stirring under the silence. Then, faint footsteps approached, lighter this time, cautious but steady. Whatever awaited behind the high walls, the decree, the summons, and the undercurrent of unrest demanded a choice. To remain a ghost drifting between silk and shadow, or to step into the half-light where secrets waited. And as the last trace of sunlight seeped away, swallowed by the lattice work that both protected and imprisoned, beyond the palace walls, the echo of the horn shattered the night again, sharp, urgent, and full of promises neither kind nor cruel. A summons too loud to ignore. The day folded open like a fragile paper fan, each breath you drew pressing the weight of uncertainty deeper into your chest. The soft thud of the horn's cry still echoed, an unwelcome drum that stirred the quiet palace air into restless ripples. Sunlight, hesitant and thin, crept through the lattice, casting fractured lines that seemed to stretch like fingers across the floor, urging you forward. You trace those sharp shadows with a fingertip, feeling the rough wood beneath, a tactile reminder of everything that held you captive. Outside, the palace was no longer subdued. Voices bounced unevenly off the stone, some hurried, worried, a swarm of whispers rising like a brewing storm. Footsteps quickened, the clatter of armor grew louder, and brasses clanged, announcing a tension you could no longer ignore. The scroll in your sleeve burns softly now, a secret ember tucked close to your skin. You felt its pulse, a rhythm foreign yet compelling, threading through the familiar dull ache of confinement. You slipped your feet into the worn slippers, soft as shadows, and approached the heavy curtain that divided your small chamber from the wider world. The fabric was thick and cool, smelling faintly of lavender and something sharper. Iron, maybe, or fear. Drawing the curtain aside, you stepped into the corridor, the silence inside the harem folding back, replaced by the low hum of urgent voices woven with hurried footsteps. The air was cooler here, scented with dust and faint traces of burnt oil, as if the walls themselves whispered of unrest. Every breath you took seemed to stretch, pulling fragments of your resolve tighter. Ahead, a pair of eunuchs moved briskly, their eyes sharp but guarded. They paused, casting a glance your way, not hostile, but measuring, as if weighing your worth against rumor and decree. A servant girl, younger than you, slipped from a side hallway. Her face pale but steady. She parted her lips to speak, but swallowed the words, nodding slightly toward the inner chambers. An invitation, or perhaps a warning. You pressed forward, past the carved columns, where intricate arabesques, carved in wood, caught stray light like secrets frozen in time. The deeper halls felt colder still, the air thick with a tension that hung like cobwebs on every surface. The faint murmur of water from distant fountains mingled with the clink of weapons and the soft rustle of silk. Behind one archway, a muted argument spilled like cracked porcelain. Voices low but sharp, edged with impatience and fear. You paused in the shadow, listening without really meaning to. Words like plot, watchful eyes, and fate flickered across the rhythm of the dispute. A sudden draft swept past, carrying with it the subtle scent of almonds and jasmine. Your small world's bittersweet reminder. You clenched your fists briefly, steadying the tremor that threatened to spill unchecked. With measured steps, you reached a broad door guarded by two silent sentinels. Their faces, carved in stone-like stillness, betrayed nothing. The air grew denser here, weighty with expectation. Your hand found the scroll again, tracing the edge beneath your palm. This was the moment your tangled thoughts had stubbornly circled. A chance to move beyond the invisible walls, or to sink deeper into silence. The door swung open with a low groan. Beyond lay a chamber lit by flickering lamps, whose flames cast tall, unstable shadows on heavy draperies. Intricate rugs, muffled footsteps, and at the far end, beneath an arch carved like a portal into another world, sat the figure you had been summoned to see. The Sultan's eyes, sharp as winter frost, fixed immediately on you. There was no warmth, no invitation, only the cold assessment of a man who ruled through gaze and decree. His fingers tapped the armrest, deliberate and slow, each beat echoing the slow pulse of the room's tension. You felt the fabric of your life here ripple, the quiet weaving of your days, the unyielding weight of silence, today challenged in a glance. His voice, when he spoke, was quieter than you expected. You have heard he said, "It is not absolute. There are exceptions, paths for those who know how to step through shadows." Your heart, steady until now, gave a subtle leap, a flutter against the ribcage. The Sultan's gaze sharpened. "Do you understand the risks, the consequences?" "Yes," you answered, each word breaking through the stillness like a small blade. He studied you with a look that both promised and threatened. "Then you will come forward tomorrow at dawn. Be prepared to listen and to choose." As the door closed behind you, its thud final and certain, the silence returned, deeper now. But inside you, the faint thrum of possibility pulsed clear. The stray cat's emerald eyes, once a flicker behind shadowed screens, reappeared in your mind, a silent herald of unpredictability and quiet revolt. You were no longer merely a ghost among silks and whispered secrets. The lattice barred sunlight, but not your will. Outside, beneath the cold glint of distant stars, the palace held its breath. The horn's echo faded into the night, but its summons lingered. A call to the impossible. Tomorrow would pull you from shadow to threshold, and somewhere beyond these walls, something ancient and restless stirred. Your story was no longer just survival. It was beginning. The chamber was thick with the murmur of shadows before the door had fully closed behind you. The Sultan's eyes, cold embers in a room softened only by the flicker of lamps, still burned in your mind like a sealed fate. You stepped back into the corridor, where the air held an edge, sharp with smoke and whispers, and the day outside had surrendered to twilight's creeping veil. Your fingers brushed the lattice as you passed, the familiar rough grain catching on your skin. Each groove was a muted song of confinement and resistance, the steady count of time spent in these silk-threaded prisons. The cracked amber light that wove through the carved wood cast fractured patterns on your hand, jagged like the splinters of your own hope. Steps echoed faintly behind you, hesitant and steady. The young servant who had brought the scroll lingered in the distance, her eyes scanning the shadows, as if expecting the walls themselves to listen. Her breath came out in quiet rhythms, the faintest rustle of her sleeve blending with the whispered currents swirling unseen. Outside, the palace shifted with the tide of unease. Voices jockeyed for attention amid the distant clang of metal and mounting urgency. The clicked commands of guards moved through the stone veins like brittle leaves caught on restless wind. Somewhere near, a fountain whispered against its basin, the water a fragile hymn to patience and forgotten calm. You allowed your gaze to drift toward the garden, an unforgiving patchwork of greens fading into brown edges, petals curled like silent screams. A stray breeze teased the brittle leaves, their dry rustle a soft memento mori. Reality here was a fragile balance. Beauty whispered beneath decay, and hope strained within walls carved for silence. The scent of almonds clung to the air like a perfumed shroud, mingling with musk and the faintest hint of burnt cedar. It twisted. Comfort turned subtle prison, as though each breath you drew carried the weight of 1,000 stories folded beneath thick silks. In the depth of your chamber, the scroll burned faintly against your skin, an ember pressing against your pulse, reminding you of the moment looming just beyond the brittle night. The invitation, a razor's edge, a chance that might thread freedom through the needle's eye or snap the fragile line you were clinging to. You moved slowly to a tiny side table where a bowl of dried rose petals stirred lightly in the cool air, releasing a faint whisper of forgotten perfume. Your fingers lingered on a single petal, fragile and trembling. A fleeting breath of color in the gathering gloom. It was the perfect emblem of your days, soft, fading, yet achingly vivid. The servant's earlier warning echoed softly in your mind about the Sultan's eyes, now keener, like polished flint, seeking sparks in every silent gesture. You knew the hearing of walls was no mere metaphor here. Every glance, every breath was scrutinized beneath the quiet. A new sound broke the steady thrum of waiting. A soft step, deliberate and near. You turned, settling the petal with care, and found yourself face to face with a figure both familiar and unsettling. Karim, the eunuch who moved like a shadow with secrets folded between his measured words. His eyes, usually unlikely mirrors of indifference, held a flicker of urgency. "They will watch you closer now," he murmured, voice a low thread. "But the scroll, it is more than words. There are eyes beyond these walls, eyes that hunger for change." You caught the subtle crease at the corner of his mouth, a ghost of a warning, or perhaps a weary smile. His words wrapped around you, a delicate yet dangerous veil. In this palace, even hope was wrapped in poison. Before you could answer, a distant cry shattered the Bourbon silence, a harsh, sharp sound from the direction of the outer gates. The echo rippled through stone corridors like a struck bell, splitting the air with sudden clarity. Guards tightened ranks below, their hurried footsteps drumming a new rhythm. The palace, once a diaphanous web of patience and threads, now hummed with readiness. Urgency bled into every corner, soaking the heavy curtains and stained floors. Karim's gaze locked briefly with yours, the flicker of resolve sharpening into something fierce. "Prepare yourself," he said. "Something stirs, and the night will be longer than before." You nodded silently, the weight of your choice settling like dust on your shoulders. The delicate dance of survival demanded a harder step now, one that might falter or sweep into unexpected rebellion. Turning away, you slipped past the carved pillars, their arabesques cold and watchful as ever, and returned to your chamber. The faint glow of the lamps cast dancing shadows that leapt and fell like restless ghosts. You knelt by the small garden window, one last time, the brittle leaves whispering a secret only the night could keep. A solitary star blinked through the heavy fabric of the sky, dim but unyielding. Outside, the palace's breath grew uneven, a creature awakening fully from slumber to hunt, to defend, to change. The scroll's promise throbbed against your sleeve, stirring an ember of defiance beneath the heavy quilt of fear. And beyond the lattice, where shadows conspired and secrets waited to be unspooled, the sharp call of the horn sounded once more, closer, more insistent, echoing a summons that could no longer be ignored. You drew your breath, steadying the storm within. Tonight the harem's silence would fracture, and the game, with all its hidden perils, was about to begin. The hush of the chamber deepened as shadows pooled beneath. The flickering lamps, reluctant to loosen their grip on the cold stone floors. You lingered by the lattice window, fingertips grazing the jagged edges of the carved wood, its texture gritty and real beneath your skin, a mute testament to the time stretched thin like the fragile silk veiling your world. The air hung thicker than ever, heavy with the scent of spilt almonds and musk, curling around the corners as if waiting to snatch away any shred of hope before dawn's promise could arrive. Outside, the palace pulsed faintly, a distant drumbeat growing louder, echoing through narrow halls and vaulted ceilings. The sharp clang of metal, a command murmured and obeyed, stirred unease like a stone cast into still water. Your breath was slow and measured. The hem of your sleeve, brushing the scroll hidden at your side, a secret flame stubbornly smoldering beneath layers of dread. It was both a key and a noose, depending on how the labyrinth ahead chose to twist. You tightened your grip, each wrinkle in the parchment, a silent tale of risk and reckoning. The corridor beyond your chamber suddenly whispered with movement. Silken shadows and hurried footsteps mingled with breathless murmurs. You caught a glimpse of Karim, swift and silent as a ghost, his eyes flickering with urgency and something darker, a warning. His presence was both comfort and caution, a reminder that even allies walked the razor's edge in this dance of secrecy. He inclined his head slightly, voice just above a whisper. They watch closer now, but not all eyes belong to the Sultan. You nodded, tasting the bitter tang of truth in his words. The palace was a web of spies and shadows, alliances hidden beneath layers of silk and poison. The scroll's invitation was a thread pulled taut in that weave, a summons to step from silence into a storm. A sudden shudder rumbled through the walls, the low, urgent call of the horn again. It sliced through the thick air, stirring a ripple of tension that flattened the jasmine's sweetness like a shadow swallowing sun. The sound was no longer distant, but near, a summons growing in menace. You retreated briefly into yourself, eyes drawn to the fragile garden below. Leaves curled brittle like ancient parchment, yet still they clung, trembling against the coming winter of your fate. One single petal, pale as moonlight, drifted slowly downward, suspended in a silent descent before settling on dust. It reminded you of your own fragile survival, caught between decay and the hope for bloom. Kareem's footsteps were sudden now, sharp on stone, as he moved to your side. "You must prepare," he said, urgency slicing through the quiet. "Tonight, the harem's silence fractures." The words settled like a cold breath. The sanctuary you had known, the measured rituals, the soft rustle of silk and whispered secrets, would soon unravel into something raw and unpredictable. Outside, the palace stirred more fiercely. The steady clip-clop of horses, the rush of armored guards, the sharp murmur of raised voices threading through the evening air. You drew a deep breath, pressing your palm against the lattice. The wood's rough grain was a bitter comfort, a reminder that even a cage could be touched, and perhaps, in fleeting moments, shaken. The chamber darkened further as the lamps guttered with languid flame. Shadows stretched and twisted like conspirators in a game whose rules remained unseen. The scroll, a weight heavier than its size, reminded you that destiny wore many faces in these walls, a chance at movement or a cruel trap. A soft knock startled your heart, barely louder than a whisper in the tense night. The door creaked open, revealing a figure cloaked in midnight, a messenger from the world outside, bearing faces unknown, but whispers alike. Their eyes, sharp and cautious, met. Yours briefly. No words passed, but the message was clear. You were no longer merely a ghost, drifting between silks and shadow. Stepping past the threshold felt like crossing a boundary where every breath might shatter the delicate peace left in your wake. The corridors flowed around you like a current, the weight of gazes, both hidden and piercing, pressing close. You sense the palace holding its breath, waiting. In the courtyard below, the stray cat of emerald eyes was nowhere to be seen, but its presence lingered, an invisible thread of wildness, touched with defiance, weaving through the tense stillness. It was a silent promise that even in this fortress of secrets, freedom sparked quietly beneath the surface. The horn cried out once more, shattering the nights. Brittle calm, your heart stirred in time with its relentless summons, a call that could not be ignored. Tonight, the lattice work would no longer keep the silence sealed. Tomorrow, the maze of shadows would deepen, and your footsteps would echo farther than ever before. And somewhere, beyond the cold walls and watchful eyes, the whispered stirrings of revolution began to swell beneath the quiet. The choice was no longer whether to stay silent. It was whether to rise and risk everything. The night had grown thick around the palace, like spilled ink, swallowing the last shards of moonlight that once teased the lattice. You stood once more at the window, fingers trailing over the familiar, jagged wood grain. The sharp scent of almonds clung to the air, softer now, mingling with the faint musky trace that blanketed the harem like a heavy shawl. Somewhere nearby, the whispered murmur of water from distant fountains mingled with the restless rustle of silk. Your breath was steady, measured against the quiet storm gathering in your chest. The scroll, hidden beneath the folds of your sleeve, pulsed cold against your skin. A secret within a secret, burning quietly like a lone coal waiting to ignite. Its weight was no longer just paper. It was the breath before the plunge, the fragile promise of movement in a world carved from silence. Behind you, the room felt smaller, shadowed corners bleeding into one another, as if the darkness itself conspired to contain the fluttering hope lodged deep inside your chest. Your eyes drifted toward the small garden, brittle leaves curling like ancient hands, reaching for an impossible warmth. A single pale petal had caught your attention, soft, trembling, a quiet echo of your own fragile existence. The palace was no longer simply a cage. It bristled with an electric tension that crackled through the carved wooden lattice and thick tapestries. Sounds stirred in the veins of the building, distant footsteps quickening, the faint clink of armor, voices low and urgent, threading together in a tight web of unease. The freshly blown horn's echo haunted the corridors, a relentless summons that tightened like a noose around your thoughts. Kareem appeared quietly, as if willing himself to be unseen, his steps nothing more than a shadow gliding over stone. His eyes caught yours with a seriousness that pulled at the edges of all your carefully constructed calm. "They watch us more closely now," he murmured, voice a low thread woven through the dense air. "But not all eyes carry the Sultan's will." Your fingers brushed the scroll again, the fragile seal pressing into your palm. Words unspoken circled in your mind, a tangle of risk and hope that refused to unravel. This was no ordinary summons. More than just an audience or an order. It was a plunge into a labyrinth where every step might clutch freedom or drag you deeper into silence. A faint, chilling draft swept through the chamber, teasing loose strands of silk and lifting the scent of jasmine and musk in indifferent waves. The night's dark fabric seemed alive, embroidered with shadows and secrets waiting to be unspooled. Kareem's gaze was steady as he leaned closer. Tonight, the silence fractures, the shadows shift. They wait for you to step beyond. The words struck a drum inside your chest. Those measured rituals, soft rustles of fabric, and whispered conversations, the fragile cocoon of the harem, were unraveling. What came next was unknown, wild, and sharp as a blade's edge. You moved from the window and paused by the small table, holding dried rose petals. You touched one lightly, its faded crimson a stark contrast to the encroaching darkness. Fragile beauty caught in inevitable decay. Like you, like your days here, caught between survival and a whispered defiance. The faint glow of flickering lamps cast restless shadows, their flames struggling against the pull of night. Patterns danced along the walls like secret conspirators. Somewhere, the distant lute had fallen silent, as if holding its breath for what was to come. Your thoughts flickered back to the Sultan, his icy gaze, sharp and unyielding, still burned like wildfire behind your closed eyelids. The quiet threat beneath his words lingered, a dance of promises and peril, knitted tight by power. Outside, the palace seemed to hold its breath. The steady tap of hoofbeats grew louder, footsteps pounding like distant war drums that fractured the evening's fragile calm. The murmur of voices rose like a tide, drawn tight with anticipation and dread. You pressed your hand against the lattice, feeling its rough texture, the cool bite of carved wood beneath your palm. A cage, yes, but also a frame for a fractured light, a puzzle still unsolved. The faint stars peeking beyond the veil of night offered no answers, only cold promises that their distant gleam would outlast whatever came. The sharp click of the door startled you. Kareem stood there, his face a mask of calm, but his eyes seethed with unease and determination. "The summons is more than a call," he said quietly. "It is a reckoning. Prepare yourself." Before you could respond, the horn cried again, closer, louder, a blade cutting through the heavy silence with urgent clarity. The sound was no longer a remote warning. It had become a call to arms, a herald of shifting tides that could not be ignored or softened. You swallowed thickly, the air suddenly too sharp, too heavy. The scroll's secret weight pulsed insistently under your sleeve, a heartbeat racing against the slow and ancient rhythm of the palace. Your gaze drifted once more to the garden, to the brittle leaves trembling in the cool night air, to the lone petal resting on dust, fragile, luminous, poised between surrender and the faintest breath of rebellion. A soft rustle caught your attention. The courtyard, usually a stage of stillness, was suddenly alive with motion. Shadows lengthened and merged, whispers tightened into cautious steps. Somewhere beyond the lattice, the silent shadow of a cat passed, emerald eyes gleaming like a shard of wild freedom in the gloom. You drew in a deep breath, steadying the storm that churned within you. The harem's veil, woven of silk and shadows, was lifting. Tomorrow awaited, and the whispered echo beyond the palace walls, that relentless cry of the horn, promised this was only the beginning. The heavy pulse of the palace lingered behind every step you took, its breath still thick in the dusky air. Your hands barely trembled as they pressed the folds of the secret scroll tighter beneath your sleeve. It was a careless weight in the small of your arm, yet it carried the crushing weight of the hours to come, hours painted with risk and whispered promise. Outside, the courtyard no longer teetered on the edge of silence. Flickers of torchlight traced the rough stone walls, shadows wrestling like restless spirits. The palace was stirring, slowly, deliberately, like a great beast awakening from a long, uneasy sleep. Somewhere, a metal chain clinked softly, a sentinel tapping impatient fingers on an iron gate. The echoes slipped through narrow corridors, weaving restless urgency into the thick air perfumed with almonds and musk. You paused by the window, fingertips brushing the faded lattice, its grooves worn smooth by years of silent longing. The faintest breath of wind teased the brittle leaves in the garden below, their curl as brittle as a whispered secret. The fluttering petals were fragile emblems, like you, hanging on barely in a place that wanted nothing but quiet obedience. Behind you, the dim glow of the lamps flickered, casting unease into the corners where shadows seemed to gather, conspiring against the hope nested inside your chest. The scent of dried roses from the small table mingled with the heaviness of anticipation. A soft stir, the near silent pace of footsteps, told your gaze toward the door. Karim materialized like a shadow stretching in the fading light, his eyes sharp, studying you with a fierce stillness. "Tonight will be different," he murmured, voice low, threading tension through the space. "The walls have ears, but not all ears belong to the Sultan. Some listen for change." You met his gaze, feeling the slow fire ignite within. His words nodded with every cautious breath you took. The palace had always been a web of spies, but now the silk threads were trembling. "Is it safe?" you asked, voice a fragile thread pulled taut. Safety. It was a laughable dream, but the ember of that secret summons pulsed beneath your skin like a warning and a dare. Karim's lips quirked, half a smile that held no comfort. "Safe is a word for those who don't want to move," he replied. "Tonight, the silence fractures. The hunt begins." A tremor slid across your spine as the distant horn cried again. Louder, closer. Its harsh cry cut through the thick night, tearing the fragile calm as if stabbing a dagger into velvet. You exhaled slowly, the breath catching on the sharp scent of crushed almonds that clung like a shroud. The garden below was waking too. A solitary petal caught the shifting breeze, twirling like a silent dancer before settling numb on the dusty earth. The fragile green leaves peered upward, stubborn remnants clutching what little life remained. You turned away, the weight of the scroll hot beneath your sleeve, a secret heartbeat racing against the palace's steady drum. The warmth of the chamber seemed to drain suddenly, swallowed whole by shadows growing longer, darker. The small lamp flickered once before shuddering and dimming, a dying sentinel bowing out into the black. You stepped into the deeper gloom, breath shallow, each heartbeat a slow, deliberate strike. Outside the carved door, muffled voices collided, conflicted whispers threading through the halls like thin smoke. Words came in fragmented bursts. Watchful eyes, danger, tomorrow's reckoning. You pressed your back lightly against the cool wood, the scent of jasmine and musk thickening, thick as treachery. This palace promised silk and shadow, but tonight the shadows whispered differently, with hunger. Kareem's presence remained close, a ghost tethered to your side. His gaze flicked toward the corridor, then back at you. "You'll not walk alone," he murmured, "but every step will be watched." The rustle of silk and the faint click of soft slippers punctuated the tense silence. A servant passed by, eyes lowered but quick, as if carrying secrets too sharp to speak aloud. The air vibrated with expectation, breaths held tight, waiting for the right moment to shatter. Moonlight crept past the lattice, casting fractured patterns like shattered glass on the worn stone floor. You traced a curling line with your finger, a broken path that mirrored the fragile threads of your own resolve. Then the slow pulse of distant hooves beat against the night's quiet, rhythmic and inexorable, like a heartbeat speeding towards something irreversible. The heavy thud of leather boots followed, drawing closer, harder. The stray cat's emerald eyes flickered in your memory, wild, untamed, a sliver of defiance untouched by the palace's suffocating hold. It had vanished into the shadows, but its spirit lingered like a promise whispered from the edge of the night. Your fingers clenched lightly around the scroll. The fragile paper whispered secrets of revolt and danger, cold against your skin like ice melting slowly. Ahead, the heavy door to the inner chambers loomed, carved wood set with swirling arabesques that seemed alive. It was a gate between worlds, between silence and storm, obedience and rebellion, captivity and flight. You bent your head briefly, gathering breath, steadying the tempest beneath calm. One last glance toward the lattice and the faint stars beyond, a cold, indifferent audience watching silently from a sky too vast for your cage. Then, as if summoned by the tension wound tight in the very air, the door creaked open. Beyond it lay the unknown. The pulse of the horn shattered the night again, sharp, insistent, a call that would echo long after silence had fled. And with it came the choice, no longer to remain shadow-bound. Your footsteps fell into rhythm with the rising storm. The game was no longer a whisper. It was beginning. The palace, finally held in a quieter embrace, seemed to exhale the tension that had clung to its stones for so long. The horn's cry, once sharp and urgent, had faded into a distant memory, an echo dissipated by the slow turn of time. You stood at the lattice window, fingers lightly brushing the familiar wood grain, its texture now a comforting touch rather than a harsh reminder. The air was softer here, carrying only faint whispers of almonds and musk, mingled with the gentle breath of evening. Outside, secret flame, burning beneath your sleeve, had been surrendered to the currents of fate. What was once a weight pressing into your skin had become a symbol, a promise of choice and courage laid bare. The summons you carried now belonged to history, its threads woven into the tapestry of your days. Within the chambers, the shadows had thinned. The heavy curtains that once seemed barriers now framed the room, bathed in the gentle amber light of evening lamps. You could feel the absence of the tension that had gripped the air for so long, replaced by a calm that settled deep into your bones. Your footsteps carried you slowly toward the small garden that had been your refuge and your prison. The scent of jasmine clung softly, no longer oppressive but tender, like a lullaby sung in a language of peace. You traced the curve of a leaf, careful not to disturb its fragile hold, and allowed a quiet smile to touch your lips. Kareem had disappeared into the winding halls, his presence no longer a shadow pressing close, but a memory of steady support. The warning in his eyes had softened, and in their depths now shimmered a quieter assurance. The palace, too, seemed to pulse with newfound steadiness, as if the long night had yielded to dawn. The people beyond the lattice seemed to breathe differently. Voices carried a lighter timbre, footsteps were unhurried, and the clinking of armor had given way to the softer music of daily life. The silk that had whispered secrets now floated lightly in the evening breeze, untethered and free. You settled once more by the window, the embroidered patterns of light playing gently on the walls, a serene dance of shadows and warmth. The stars, at last visible beyond the lattice, twinkled softly in the vast sky, distant but constant companions. In that moment, the weight of years dissolved into a calm acceptance. The silence that had once pressed so heavily was transformed into a quiet peace, like the soft closing of a well-loved book. The threads of your story had woven themselves into the enduring fabric of this place, a tale no longer of confinement, but of resilience found in patience and hope. Your breath slowed, steady and deep as the night drew its velvet curtains close. The last petal, once trembling with uncertainty, rested still and sure on the earth, its journey complete. Outside, the palace settled into a tranquil hush. The faint rustle of silk and the gentle song of the lute returned as companions to the quiet. The cage of carved wood remained, but no longer as a prison. It framed a world where light and shadow coexisted, where endings gave way to new beginnings, whispered softly beneath the stars. You closed your eyes, feeling the comforting warmth of the room hold you safely. And as the night deepened, a peaceful calm wrapped around your thoughts, carrying you gently toward rest. The story, finally told, faded like the last glow of twilight. soft, whole, and complete.